Welcome, everybody. This is Salah Issa. I am an assistant professor at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. Grain safety has been my bread and butter. That's actually what I did my whole PhD research on, is just trying to understand these incidents, why they occur, and how we can prevent them. During my tenure at Purdue, that's where I got my PhD. I read over 2,000 grain entrapment incidents to share with you, and I'll be sharing the results of my reading in this presentation. John, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I will. My name is John Lee, and I work for the Grain and Feed Association of Illinois. My title there, it's a long title. It's Director of Safety, Health, and Environmental Services. It's quite a lot to write in an application for a magazine back in the day. Grain and Feed of Illinois is a trade association, and our members are grain elevators and feed mills. We have large multinational companies like ADM and Cargill, all the way down to co-ops and small privates. And I help them with regulatory issues, OSHA, EPA, DOT, compliance, and I've been there for a long time, 26 years.
Well, that's awesome. You're about to enter your 30-year anniversary.
I'm getting closer, for sure.
Wow.
And I have personally dealt, or I've directly or indirectly dealt with 13 grain entrapment fatalities. So this is a topic that I'm unfortunately more familiar with than I like to be.
Yeah, I hear you there. Well, audience, everybody, I see people coming in. Welcome to Saving Lives in Grain. Here we're going to go over research behind these strategies that we've developed on how to prevent grain entrapments. So today our objectives is we want to try to explain to you that grain entrapments, it's not just one type. There's multiple types, multiple ways a person can get entrapped in grain. We're going to highlight to you some of the trends we're seeing in youth versus adult entrapments. We want to talk about that pressure that you feel on your chest if you're entrapped in grain and what its implications are when it comes to injuries and fatalities. And lastly, but most importantly, we're going to have John Lee discuss all the effective strategies that you could use to minimize the necessity of entering a grain bin. So to get started, I just would like to go through two key definitions. Anytime I use the word engulfment, I'm specifically referring to a person who is buried in grain to the point that their airways are under the grain mass. So you can imagine basically that grain mass is covering your nose or above. You are fully engulfed in grain. You can't breathe, in a sense. We had one case where somebody was entrapped head first, and even though his legs were still dangling, that's also, in a sense, an engulfment, right? Because you can't breathe. That's the whole point of that definition. The other definition we use is grain entrapment. This more generically refers to any time a person is stuck in the grain mass, regardless of how deep it is. And it actually doesn't take much. Grain needs to only reach your knees before you're entrapped in grain. When I'm using these terms in contrast with each other, treat it that engulfment is fully drowned under grain mass. Entrapment, his airways are above the grain mass. If I use just the term grain entrapment, I'm meaning it generally, and I'm covering really all cases. So just to give you the numbers, just so you can see why is this an issue and why is this still worth talking about. This is the data from Purdue University PACS database. You could see that really since 2011, it's been this consistent trend of around 20 to 40 cases. And it's just averaging in and out between those that 20 to 40, some sort of cyclical pattern we see there. But we've been addressing issues related to grain safety at the very least from 2008. That's from OSHA Direct, but even earlier. but we're not making as much headway as we'd like. This is why this is such a pertinent issue. When you look at 2022, we had 42 grain entrapments. That represented a 45% increase of previous year. About a third of them, or slightly more than a third of them, were fatal. That's good. Usually our fatality rates are around 50%. 20% of these incidents involved either young workers under the age of 20 or workers over the age of 60. And historically, that percentage has been as high as 50%. And around half of these cases occurred on farms directly. So there's a lot of different ways you can get entrapped in grain. It can be through a free-flowing column of grain. It can be through a collapse of a vertically crested grain, where basically it's just an avalanche that drowns you. It can be a surface where you're just falling through that surface. You can get entrapped in a freestanding pile. There can be a structure of failure that causes an entrapment. Using grain vacuums occurs as well as an entrapment source. And then lastly, you could be covered by grain. We will cover all the red colored ones. We'll focus on those. But I have to point that most of these, they're occurring from one main cause, and that's poor grain.
Okay, Salah, I'm taking over here again.
Yeah, this is yours.
This is my spot. So hopefully none of you in the audience have seen grain like that before, because that's not good. That's, the farming. I work in the commercial side, like I mentioned. When you break it down, grain is bulk material handling and storage. The only difference between what grain handling and sand or gravel is every kernel of corn, every soybean is a living organism, and it wants to grow. And you're limited. In that picture there, that was put away too wet, and didn't get cooled down properly. And moisture formed. Actually, molds formed, and then microorganisms started eating the mold, giving off heat, and then you just get a mess. There are charts on how long you can store grain at different moistures, and I just looked it up this morning because I can't remember them. But commercial industry, they teach employees to at harvest time to cool the grain down to 40 degrees, but above freezing, anywhere from 30 degrees Fahrenheit, above 32 degrees Fahrenheit to 40. But anything around lower than 40 or less is what they want. And you can store grain there greater than 300 days at 15% moisture. At 50 degrees Fahrenheit, you can only store grain for 288 days. I'm sorry, at 50 degrees at 18% moisture, it's 288 days. At 80 degrees, you can only store grain at 27% moisture. You can only store grain 87 days. So the point is, the wetter it is, the less longer you can store it. So you need to cool it down. But back to Salah's point, yeah, quality is all of it. Very rarely adults get caught in good quality grain. The temperatures rise, like I mentioned, the moisture. Thanks a lot. That's good. We can move on. I hit it there pretty well. Yeah. So why have entries fail? So that picture there on the right is an engulfment, obviously, and is a rescue happening, and that's how a rescue takes place. You use a grain rescue tube. You have to shield the victim and then dig them out. You're basically rescuing the grain from the person, and then the person comes with it. And that was a 70-plus-year-old farmer, I believe 72 years old, and he was in the bin rotting the grain because of bad quality. Looking at that picture, I was asked people I train, would that farmer have been in that bin if that quality was good? No one goes in a grain bin if the quality is good. So he was in there with a rod poking it, trying to get the sump hole unplugged with the unloading equipment running. And luckily he stayed above he was entrapped, not engulfed. He didn't go completely under, and they were able to get him out and saved him. But the red, orange, or the orange, whatever that color is, my wife says I'm colorblind. That's my main point here. Grain bin entry safety starts with grain quality management. If you don't let it look like that in the picture, most of the time nobody's going to get engulfed. Okay, next slide, Salah. But the number one cause of entrapment is what that farmer did, is rotting sumps for farm and commercial, at least in my experience. Salah has all the statistics. Ones I've dealt with, it's somebody's in there rodding. Well, most of them were rodding the sample. I joke, and there's not much to joke about with this, but that quality is so bad, the bad quality might save his life in the situation because it'll probably plug up again before it totally engulfs him. But never, ever, ever get in the bin and do that with the unload equipment running. And if you do it with the unload equipment off, you've got to take a lot of precautions with lifelines and harnesses, the way to secure yourself, because there could be a void underneath it, which I will show you that here shortly. So I'll go ahead. So here's an example. This was a commercial elevator. Won't mention the name, but you can see those PVC pipes. I joke with the guys. I said, what are you propping the door open with those? And I know what they're doing with them. And there was a 35-year employee in his 50s. He had been in that bin dozens of times in his career, and they had a problem there with the soybean pods plugging up a sump hole, like the picture on the right. And it was the one next to the wall. So he would go in there and he would just poke it with that equipment running. Didn't have an observer, didn't follow OSHA procedures, which commercial is supposed to. He goes in there and pokes it, but then the grain near it was hung up, and it avalanched on him and pushed him against the wall. And before he knew it, he was up to his chest. And he didn't think it would ever happen to him, and he could not believe how fast it happened. And but rods, I mean, I see those laying around farms and commercial facilities, and those PVC pipe like that has killed a lot of people doing it wrong, rodding sumps without turning equipment off. Okay, Salah? So don't do that. It's my circle line through it there. So flowing grain entrapment. I believe Salah's going to have some statistics. This is where a lot of kids get caught. But if you're in a bin and it starts to flow while you're in there, you don't have a lot of time. And you get in the commercial industry, some of their unload speeds are 40,000 an hour, 60,000 an hour. You get down to the Gulf of Mexico, they can unload barges and other equipment in 80,000 bushels an hour. So, and Salah mentioned it earlier, once you get above your knee, just a little above your knees, you're done. And if the grain's flowing, you're along for the ride. And that's what these pictures are representing. So the key thing is never get in the bin that's equipment running. So I'll start that video if you would. So there's not much humorous about grain entrapment, but I kind of find this is pigeon entrapment. But it illustrates if this is what happened to the farmer in my first slide, second slide, he was in there rotting the sump, and once he got it flowing, he became the pigeon. So you notice they're just in there eating the grain, and then they're going down with it. So pigeons are as dumb as you thought they were. I don't know if you can hear it, but it's the flight of the bumblebees playing. So that's what will happen to you if you get in there. Once you get the grain flowing, you become the pigeon. It's my point there. So this is a avalanche entrapment. Occurs when individuals try to break down a column of grain that ends up collapsing on top of them. These are two examples. This was corn stored way too wet, 23 to 25 degree moisture. And this was 2009. I'm sorry, this was 2010 from the 2009 crop year, which was a really wet year. And that was the year you were lucky to get the grain down to dry it down to 23 to 25%. That was after running it through the dryer more than once. And they didn't get this bin cored. And that tower there on the left is 65 feet tall. So sometimes those things you can hit them with a pickaxe and nothing happens, but other times you barely touch them and they can collapse upon you. The one on the right there is a roof vent leak and created a chimney effect there. So if someone would come in from underneath there, you poke that grain, it could avalanche upon you. So what I would recommend in this situation on the right is you just open up, just unload the bin as normal. Hopefully it won't plug on you where you have to unplug it, and then let it fall on its own. But historically, 9% of all entrapments are this avalanching. 61% are fatal. But from my experience, rotting the sump is number one, and this is number two biggest cause. Hung up grain, breaking free on somebody. Okay, Salah.
Yeah, and it is number two, by the way.
Okay. And this chart illustrates it also. Every flowing material has an angle of repose it wants to go to. Doesn't matter what it is, gravel, sand, dirt, and corn, soybeans, wheat, milo, you name it. This picture illustrates what the kind of corn you want to have in your bins. 21 to 23 degrees angular repose. So the chart's illustrating how deep it would be on the sides of your bin. So an 18-foot bin would be 4 feet on the wall. You have to remember your trigonometry here. A 60-foot bin would be 13 feet, and a 105-foot bin is like a commercial bin would be 22 feet on the sidewall. But you could walk. That grain is not going to slide on you. It's at its angle of repose. You could walk up and down that slope all day long, and your only hazard would be a heart attack in that situation, and of course exposure to dust and different things. But look at the pictures on the right, upper, top, and bottom there. So the worker has a rod poking, and sometimes, like I said, you could hit that with a pickaxe and nothing happens. But there could be a crust holding that back, holding good grain behind it. And once you break that up, it wants to go back. The grain wants to go back to its natural angle of repose, and then you're completely covered in grain. And they wouldn't even know where to find you. And that's, as far as the rescue goes, they wouldn't even know where to start to look for you. So that is the number one cause. I see it more on the sidewalls than I see it in the middle, but it does happen in any part of the bin. That can happen. I do have I'll go back one slide, Salah, would you? Go back one.
Yeah.
One more. I didn't put it in here. I should have. There you go. That one. One of our members showed me a picture. They had a tower of soybeans in a bin caused by soybean pods that was about that tall, and they tried everything to break it up. They, you name it, it was tried. Things that would have scared a safety guy like myself. They finally got 2 tow trucks. They took panels off the bin, took 2 tow trucks, put a cable all the way around it, and pulled. And the tow truck's front ends came off the ground before the thing fell. That's how hard it was in the bin. That's how big of a problem something like this can be. So, okay, Go forward, Salah. So here's an avalanche. Don't do this. Common sense will tell you. I don't know if he's deep enough to be fully engulfed, or entrapped, but that's not too smart. That's very unstable grain. That angle of repose is about 90. You don't put yourself in that situation. I know it's people go in and just want to start poking stuff, things like that, but you just cannot do it. Okay, Salah.
Yeah.
Then the third biggest cause is bridging, and that's where you get, like as I mentioned, storage, especially in northern climates. You got warm grain from the grain dryer goes in the bin, and then above there might be, like in North Dakota, it may be 10 degrees at harvest time, and you get condensation forms, and then it gets wet, and then you get a crust forms, and then as you pull out of that bin, a bridge forms, and then if you don't realize it's there, you walk out and unsuspectingly, and it collapses, and you can be engulfed that way. Another thing is, in the commercial bins, they're so big that if a bridge like that would form, eventually it would break because you undermine it. And farms, that could happen on farms too. And then the chunks go down in the hole, and then somebody goes in there to poke it. So all this, it's all quality. It really is. But one way to check, when you unload the commercial guys, they always know roughly what's in that bin. And if they think that bin should be coned down where it's dished and it's not, that's one red flag. Or if you walk in a bin, it's like walking on concrete. That could be one. There are, the rural legends where an entire bin is completely empty and there's 18-inch bridge all the way across with nothing underneath it. And I know 3 gentlemen who would swear on a stack of Bibles they've seen that. with their own eyes, with 18-inch crust and 60 feet of nothing underneath it.
Yeah.
So obviously you would not want to walk on that or poke it. And this is not how to check for it. This is a TikTok video. Go ahead and play that, Salah.
Yep.
Now this is quality corn. That is not quality corn. Stepping over a running PTO.
We still can't get through it.
Yeah, I think this is a safety nightmare video for safety professionals.
So they pulled, I don't know if you could hear it, but they pulled 5 loads out of that bin. And in a small bin like that, if it wasn't dished, obviously you don't go in there and jump on it. I don't know if you noticed, but that grain was sprouting. And that's another red flag. That's also the kind of corn that could really make you sick with the molds. It's called grain fever. I believe it's the technical term, I think, is toxic organic dust syndrome. But yeah, you would not want to enter, you do not enter a bin like that one, for sure. Okay, Salah, next slide. So structural failures, this is, I can't believe 4% of the cases are this, and it's not a good recovery rate, but this is where the grain, the structure itself fails. And I know it happened in Toledo, Illinois last fall, I believe.
Yeah.
And then I know it happened around Indianapolis about 4 years ago. A hopper bottom overhead tank that was filling a semi engulfed and completely covered the driver who was standing outside in grain. So that's, if you ever see sheared bolt heads around your structures, figure out where they came from, because there's a lot of pressure on grain bins. And make sure you unload them correctly. Don't unload from the side, unload them from the center, because that puts a lot of stress on them. Unless they're designed for that with side draws or something. But, okay. If you got any comments on that one, Salah, I think you knew another story.
I do. Actually, there is, I can't remember where, but there's a grain bin structurally when it collapsed. There was a worker that was just walking near it, doing something else entirely. It took them days to find his body, just from the amount of grain that covered him.
This is completely opposite way to being engulfed. Normally if you go down in it, this is coming on top of you or sideways on you.
Yeah.
It's stunning me that it's 4% of them, but okay.
They are there. They are there.
Yeah. And grain storage structures aren't getting any younger, like the rest of us. Grain vacuum occurs when the vacuum is used too close or used close to the feet, and basically they engulf themselves. Good quality. I mean, this is one of the cases where good quality is engulfment happens within good quality grain. So obviously you never would stand in grain that's above your head and stick the vac hose down in there. You want to stand on the concrete and pull it at you. The hose goes, you stand on ankle deep grain and pull it toward you. These happen. I know in Iowa it happened. One thing to do if you're ever using a vac like that and it started to suck you in, don't try to pull it out, because you're just going to go down faster. If you can, jam it, plug it, try to jam it so it locks, airlock, and that might save your life. But don't ever get on top of grain and try to vac with it. That is one of the hazards. Okay, next slide.
So I'm going to take over here. And what's really interesting with grain entrapments compared to other maybe occupational industrial incidents is the number of youth involved. So this is looking historically over a 40-year period, looking at all the cases where the age is known. And when we knew where the age was, you can see around 28% of these incidents involved workers under the age of 20. Another 20% is workers above the age of 60. That's our two big categories that you wouldn't really anticipate in any other job. And this is important to highlight that as you are learning this, that you have to spread that message to youth. And you have to teach them about these dangers and not to enter grain bins. If you look at it by month, for the ages of 1 to 20, you could see that this entrapment spike around the month of October and November, and then you have another big a number around June, and summer is pretty high. So you can see this is really occurring around harvest and also in the summer, preparing and clearing out the grain bins. So this is a message to our youth to be careful and not enter grain bins without all the safety precautions at the very least. So this number dates, by the way, about 5 years ago. We had already reached 1,400. Now we're closer to 1,600 grain entrapments. We've been collecting these incidents from the 1960s. 70%, 75% of all of them occur here in the Midwest. So Indiana, Illinois, Iowa are top states where grain entrapments occur. Generally, we know the types around 70% of the time, the type of grain entrapment. And for the most part, flowing grain is our number one, as John Lee indicated, followed by avalanche. We have corn occurs in 50% of the cases, but we've also seen entrapments in soybean, wheat, rice, pinto beans, cotton seeds, and other processed foods. So the overall, in this database, overall fatality rate is 67%. Last 5 years is around 42%. So we're getting better in how to address and recover and rescue people. When it comes to engulfments, if somebody is fully entrapped in grain, it's around 88% fatal. If you're only entrapped in grain, it's still around 70% fatal. And I'm going to talk about why even just getting entrapped in grain, you're still see this fatality rate. The major cause of death is asphyxiation and being crushed by grain. So I've led an effort to get better understanding of what's really occurring when somebody entraps in grain. There's some 3 cases that I've reviewed that really, in a sense, put this research into scope. So the first time was just a medical report where an old man, he was entrapped only to his chest. He was entrapped in 0 Celsius corn, so 32 Fahrenheit. He generally had heart issues, and he was complaining of intense chest pain. And they tried to give him pain meds and tried to give him medicine to remove that chest pain. Nothing really worked. When they tried to pull him out, so they tied a rope around him and tried to pull him straight out, it was too painful for him to go on. Finally, they got the idea, hey, let's put a tube around him and extract the grain. The moment they moved the grain, all his pain was gone. So just think about these for these conditions for a second and now we're going to jump to our second case. So this occurs in Texas. This occurs to a worker who wore a harness, a safety line, and it was tied to a self-retracting line, an anchor point, and that self-retracting line never braked when he started getting pulled into the grain, and he ended up getting fully engulfed. And our last case was this person who was entrapped in wheat. He was also struggling to breathe. This time, they went ahead and they pulled him straight out because they were afraid he might die. And by pulling him out, he ended up losing the capacity to walk for about 6 months and had an injury to his spine and legs. And to this day, or at least to the report, he started experiencing panic attacks anytime he was in a confined space, including a car. So based on all of these cases, there's a lot of research needed to understand what is that pressure on your chest and how much force does it take to extract an individual. Related to that, how much force can a spine handle if you're going to pull somebody out? What is that blood flow rate going on for a person entrapped? So early on, we talked about a person who was fully engulfed in grain for several hours. When they extracted him, he had extremely high blood pressure rate, very high. They were so shocked. It was as if he was running a marathon and they told this young kid point blank, if you were any older, you would have died. Also, what does the grain temperature impact on your body, and the psychology play a role? We're not going to be able to go through everything here, but I'm just going to focus on the main ones. So, as John Lee talked about, any material, granule material, it likes to have this angle of repose. Now, this angle of repose, it's tied to. You can think of it; it's tied directly to gravity, and that angle of repose also means that unlike water, like when you go uh, jump into water, that pressure on your chest is a constant. But when it comes to granule materials, there's actually two different pressures acting on you. You have what we call active pressure, which you could think of it kind of a box is on an incline. It's flowing with gravity, so it's a lower force, right? If you're pushing that box down, it takes lower force than pushing it up. And then that second one is passive, where you're pushing that box up. So if you think of somebody entrapped in grain, when there's granule material on his chest, if you try to measure the force there, you're just measuring the active force, and that's what one of the previous researchers, Moore and Johns, they measured the active force, and it was less than water. So and you think, okay, you can easily breathe there, but we know we can from personal experience. But if you take a moment and realize, how do you breathe? You exhale, you inhale, right? You're moving your chest. So when you're trying to take a breath, you're pushing your chest against the grain, and that's basically a passive force. So that was one of my biggest researches, is to try to measure passive force. So I ended up developing this mini grain bin where just two blocks in the middle. I'd fill. So if you see, it's like composed of three chambers. Two chambers on either side have grain. The middle chamber is empty, and that's where I had these two wooden blocks. I just pushed them outwards into the grain, and I measured the force required to push them out into the grain. So you get this very nice graph. You can calculate the work exerted by measuring that area. And what I came up is at 8 inches deep, right? So you could say the grain is about to your mouth level, maybe a tiny bit higher. It exerts about 7.3 kilopascals, or one psi. What's really more important is not the numbers. Nobody cares about the numbers in a sense. It is comparing that to water. So if you are in water and you are in water to that level depth, I think you've all have experienced that. You don't feel much. There's not a lot of pressure. Now, if you were in grain in the similar situation, you'd have experienced 2 to 3 times more pressure. So imagine that you're 2 to 3 times deeper and you're trying to breathe. The next experiment, which we did actually in Illinois, John Lee and a lot of other individuals helped me with this. We took a load cell, that's the thing that you see in a blue circle, and we tied it around our very handsome victim, and we buried him fully in grain and then at different depths. So we buried him fully under grain, to his shoulder levels, to his waist levels, and we started pulling him out. We also pulled him out at different angles, because I was really interested. If you pull somebody straight up versus sideways, is there a difference in force? And the reason why is that if you think of somebody fully entrapped in grain, usually around the center, but the outlet is on the side, and if they're tying it to the outlet, or they're pulling from the outlet, they might be pulling sideways. And so what we found is that as that pull angle gets deeper, so you're pulling them more and more to the side versus straight up. So 15 is at the deepest that we measured. You experience around 4,000 to 4,500 newtons. Now, I know this is about 1,000 pounds of force, but I want what that number is important is really in understanding how much your spine can handle, right? Because if your spine can handle it, who cares? But and when we tested it in corn and soybeans, except for that last angle, which maybe because soybeans are round and it was less force, we saw it was very hard to distinguish between either one of them. So now I did that same. So I went back to my lab. From the veterinary school, they gave us some lamb spine. It was not a fun experience. I had to clean those spines up, remove the muscle because we could only really test the force of the ligament. So I went and put them in a machine and I pulled them apart over and over again. And what I found that to pull them apart, it takes somewhere between 2,000 newtons of force, or around 500 pounds, force pounds. And that tells me, what the most important thing tells me is that the amount of force required to pull a spine apart and the amount of force required to pull a person completely out, it's the same magnitude, which means that you can injure somebody directly. Now, again, this is just pulling the bone mass apart, right? There's you have your skin, you have your muscles, you have all that acts as other layers of protection. But we have to remember when our victims, a lot of them are older age. So you cannot make that assumption that, oh, maybe it'll be safe for me to pull this person. So that's just one big finding that we found. So the next one is grain temperature. In cold water, in freezing water almost, a person can survive around 30 to 90 minutes. Water is 25 more times more conductive than air. Grain is around 7 to 8 more conductive times than air. So you'll be able to survive longer in grain than water, but it's not, I can't give you a time on how much longer can somebody survive. That's just something really to keep in mind on it, that you will experience that cold if you are in a grain mass. Another cool thing that we found, so that blood flow really, I found it very confusing. Why would somebody have such a high blood flow if they're completely fully entrapped in grain, right? They're not moving. They're just stuck. They're just in suspension. So why would they experience so much blood flow? Such a high heart rate and blood flow. So I had to end up going to other literature. And what I found was 2 different research articles that were really interesting. First one was boa constrictors. A lot of people think that they kill their prey by basically squeezing on their chests and suffocating their prey. They don't. They did this research with mice where they put sensors on mice to measure how do boa constrictors kill mice. And what they do, they were actually putting pressure on the body of the mouse, not the chest. And they saw these huge spikes in blood flow, in the heart rates for these mice as they were pulling. And basically, they were giving them heart attacks or cardiac arrests. That's how boa constrictors were killing these mice. And that tells us that, hey, that extra force, and we told you it's like 2 to 3 times that force that you'd experience in water on your whole body, that can actually allow enough constriction to increase your blood flow. The next thing we saw is that a study in harness suspensions is if you were fully suspended in a harness, you would die. Where if you're fully suspended, you can't move at all. It's really only a matter of time that your heart rate goes up and you end up dying. So that was really intense research for us and highlights, in a sense, the danger of grain entrapments and why, even if somebody is only entrapped to their chest level in grain, they're still at a risk of dying. And we see that around 77% of the cases become fatal. So my recommendations from that research is really don't get entrapped in grain, right? It sounds like a bit self-serving, but that's really important because these are preventable incidents. 90%, 94% of all grain entrapments. So the only ones I'm considering is that structure failures. There's nothing you can do if that happens. But everything else, either following proper maintenance or following some of the strategies to clear grain, it's all preventable. And another important thing is that lockout and tag out is critical. We had people go in grain, do everything correctly, and they did not lock out and tag out. And then somebody comes, needs to empty their grain, does not know that anybody's in it, and ends up drowning them. John, I'm giving you the last section. Ready?
Okay, I'm ready. Great research, Salah. That's very interesting about the boa constrictors. And I've been entrapped in training sessions in grain up to the belly button. And, 15 minutes, my feet are going numb. The pressures are amazing. And you think you're moving your legs, and all you're doing is moving your feet and your shoes or your boots. It's a horrible thing. And I agree 100%. 99, all of them are preventable, or 94% of them are preventable, wherever that statistic was, except for the collapses, because people just get in a hurry and trying to get the job done. And that's my topic here to finish this out is strategies to handling out of condition grain. What to do when the grain stops coming out. Okay, I'm a typical safety guy. I'm really good at telling you all the things you can't do. I thought I would change my philosophy and come up with some ideas that you can do to get a bin unplugged safely. Okay, Salah. In the commercial industry, hopefully, and all the new stuff has tunnels. And some of the old stuff did too, but they physically have tunnels that you can get into. And some of them are 4 feet high, some of them are 7 feet high. And there's ports under all the drops that fill the conveyors. That's what this worker here is doing. He's got I think it's a hoe. He's jamming the hoe up in there, sticking a rod up in there. And that sump hole's plugged rather than go on top of it and poke it. He's doing it from underneath. He should have gloves on. But other than that, I mean, it's hard to get hurt here other than this soft tissue injury from straining yourself. That's, if you can, always come in from the bottom. Make a port like that. And then, okay, Salah. So sometimes they use that rod and actually go back one more time, Salah. Go back one. So I know, so sometimes they poke and they create a void. And one of the guys I was talking with, he said he had a flexible, like PVC pipe. It was 18 feet long. He stuck it all the way up into that port, and his hand was butting up to the opening, and he could not feel any resistance. And what had happened is, okay, go to the next. He and some other guys had created a void from their rotting from underneath. To me, this would be a much more common example of bridging, especially in the commercial industry. But so it's a good thing to run from underneath. But if you ever do that and you feel no resistance, but the grain's not flowing, don't go on top of it and start poking from above. Go ahead, Salah. Because that would be, if it's it could be a deep enough void to completely engulf you or entrap you for sure. So don't do that. Okay, that's one way to do it, is rod from underneath. Unfortunately, a lot of the commercial bins and most farm bins don't have a tunnel. So if you're going from the top, you should try to follow, these are based off the OSHA rules, entry rules. Grain industry has to follow 1910-272, general industry standard for grain handling. But Salah mentioned it, and I mentioned it. You lock out the unloading equipment, so it never get in a bin that can flow on purpose or unexpectedly. If you're coming from the top, you'd want to wear a harness and lifeline and try to tie off somewhere that would prevent you from sinking further than waist deep, which is what OSHA considers a safe level, is waist deep or more, which that seems crazy to me because you'd be entrapped. Your farmers aren't going to do permits, but grain industry but elevators do, and they're supposed to check the atmosphere. So if it's in most cases, it's the biggest atmospheric hazard is going to be molds and different things like that. But occasionally there's a fire you didn't know about or something. There could be an atmospheric issue. Okay, go ahead, Salah. Here's some bin. These are things you could do before you fill the bin, and they work pretty well. Brock grain bin makes this, they call it the well guard, and it goes over your sump holes. And as the grain flows down, if there's chunks, it breaks the chunks up, and then in the smaller pieces, and it will go down through the sump hole. If you look on the picture on the right, Some of the commercial guys swear by these. That's just rebar welded together into a pyramid, and that sets over the sump hole. And then as the chunks come down, it breaks them up into smaller pieces and they go in. Some people swear by them, other people cuss them. They say just the pieces break up and go to the side, and then they make a big rat hole. The best thing that I've seen as a treatment is this Mighty Mini Sump Saver, and it is commercially sold. You can look it up online, and it sets directly over the sump hole or as close as you can get it to it. If it's too big if the opening is too big, you can set it to the side, but over the top if you can. And then you run hydraulic lines out to the side of the bin, drill holes in the bin, and put a port there, and you can back a tractor in to run the hydraulics, or this company makes a portable hydraulic unit, and as you're unloading the bin, that you turn that on and that just spins and it slowly breaks up the chunks. I know several commercial companies that have grain bins with no tunnels they can rod from underneath, and they put these in and they swear by them. So it breaks up the soybean pods, chunks. They really good in soybeans and corn, but especially soybeans. Okay, next. And Salah, we could probably put that in. I don't know if you put it in somewhere, the website for that.
Yeah, for sure.
Here's another thing you can do. This was a company. This is an old tank and no tunnel to get underneath and rod. So they welded threaded nuts onto that slide gate, which would restrict the opening, wouldn't open quite as far. But then there's threaded pipe that they can thread onto that slide gate, and then those pipes come out so the sweep auger could go past. But once you're done cleaning the bin, you put those rods in. Then when you fill the bin, as it's unloading, if the pods build up over that hole and plug it up, they can, from outside, they can open that gate, slide that gate back and forth, and those rods stick up high enough they can clear the plug. And you have to put a persuader on the outside, hit it with a sledgehammer sometimes. Here's another one. This was in a 90-foot bin that I saw, and they put a piece of galvanized pipe on the surface of the aeration floor. And then, so it's inside and outside. And then if it plugs, you can pull that rod back and forth as the arrow shows to the left and right. And then in this case, back and forth and to the left and right. And works excellent. This company swears by it. So if you ever would do something like this, when you get done, when you're ready to fill the bin, you probably want to pull it back away from the hole so it doesn't restrict the hole. But other than that, it works great. There's another company, which I did not have a picture of. They actually did the same thing with compressed air, where they can have a pipe that blows air out, which is one of my next topics coming up here. But go ahead, Salah. Commercial industry, this is a challenge because the bins are, most commercial elevators don't have bins less than 60 feet. So a lot of them are 105, 135, but farm bins, 18 feet, smaller ones, you could use a rod from above and poke down and break things up. It wouldn't be a fun job. But in this picture here, you can see, you can't see it, but they cut a hole in the side panel and there's a grain back, and they're just busting the grain up, letting it flow out to that, or unloading the bin through the grain back and then breaking up the chunks to get it to the grain back. That's another method. And you're staying out of the bin, you're protected. Grain backs. If you own one, maybe you could, or if you don't own one, you could rent one. Maybe you could feed it into the bin while staying out and just let it do its thing and undermine. If you had a pyramid or something unstable, you could, if you bury the backhoe, so what? At least you weren't in there with it. That'd be another method. And I mentioned earlier, don't ever get on grain that is over your head and back. These guys are standing pretty much knee deep or less. But that's how you should operate. But you'd want to definitely train people on how to run one before you do it. And communication is always important. Okay, next slide. And University of Illinois and Salah, they're doing a compressed air study, and this has been used for a long time in the industry. And I believe there was a farmer in Nebraska who came to this with an idea, and you pull the in a farm bin, you pull the screw auger out of the bin underneath, and then you can run a rod in there with the big air compressor, and so it's use high pressure air to break up clumps. It's cheap. It can be inserted in the flighting and breaks up issues. And you'll notice in that picture, that's black pipe with crimped to force more air or accelerate the air as it comes out of it. And then go to more slide, Salah. You're not going to do that with your Craftsman air compressor in your shop. You're going to have to get something on a big one like this. I don't remember the number, Salah, how much air it takes, but it takes a lot. And
185 CFM.
185 PSI. And these have a lot of CFM also. But there are some issues, though, some safety issues. You could have dust clouds, air quality. I don't see a lot of dust explosion hazards, but you could have a flash fire if you had a spark with much of dust and suspension. Really loud projectiles coming out. That's something to watch. Heat. So go one more slide, Salah. So you could make an air wand like this. And it's a ball valve and a Chicago fitting. And it scares me to tell people to do something like this, but if you do it right, you can do it safely. But so then you could come in from a tunnel and blast up with one of these using that air compressor, or you could stay from outside and blast at a tower or unstable grain. If you would ever do something like this, make sure you use those safety clips. There's a cotter pin that when you connect those, so when those things would come apart, it'd be very dangerous. But if you would ever set something like this up, you definitely would want to. Minimum PPE would be safety glasses, earplugs, and welding gloves, because that pipe from the friction there is going to get very hot. Okay, Salah. And then the last thing is you could there's commercial bin cleaning services. I know the one that I'm familiar with is called Mole Master. And that picture on the right there, that is not grain, but they use the same thing in grain. It's a pneumatic whip. They drop it in from the top and it whips around. I know the ethanol industry uses them a lot for the dried distillers grains, and things get hung up. Also, those commercial services, they would probably come in with an air compressor and the wand like I just showed. And then the one on the left is not really a commercial cleaning service, but it's called the Grain Weevil Bot. And I encourage you to get on YouTube and watch a video of this. It is really the future of cleaning bins, I think, and keeps people out. It's there's 2 augers on it, and I believe right now it's remote control, but eventually it's going to be automated where it just does its thing. And if you had a crust on the surface or a problem, you can send that in to try to break it up. I know they're in testing now to make it the motor intrinsically safe, but eventually it will be commercially sold if it isn't already.
So actually starting this year, they're offering it as a commercial service.
Oh, they are? Okay.
Yes.
Oh, they are? Okay.
Yes. But they're not selling it, but they're doing a commercial service where you can rent them out.
I did not know that. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, next slide. So these are what the grain elevators have to follow, but it's a good one for you. Farmers aren't going to do a permit, but lock everything out, check your atmosphere, wear a lifeline harness if it's necessary. You're in grain more than waist deep. But the key thing to remember is never enter alone. There's always safety in numbers. If something happens or there's an avalanche, you can get help, or you can shut equipment off. But the ultimate key thing is you got to evaluate. When you look in a bin, you got to evaluate. Does it look stable? Does angular pose look right? Look at the walls. Is there grain hung up on the walls? I've seen huge chunks hung on the walls that would weigh 800 pounds if they fell on someone. So it's all about evaluating what's in that bin every time you go in, and it can change as you unload it. Things can, we're covered in grain can be exposed. Okay, next slide, Salah.
So right here, we're now actually at time, and we'll take in questions as they come. And I'm going to ask you that first question. You could see from here, this is just this year, grain entrapments are continuously occurring. They're continuously happening. So John Lee, if somebody does get entrapped in grain, how do you respond? How should a farmer do?
Well, the number one thing is, like I said, it's evaluate what's going on in the bin. Don't get caught, like you said. But if someone's caught, shut off everything immediately. All the unloading equipment, if it's a tractor, if it's electrically driven auger, conveyor, whatever. Don't rush in and try to save someone, because if their head is above the surface and you rush in there, the angle of repose, you could push grain around and completely bury them. If their arms are exposed, you could throw them a bucket or a trash can to pull over their head to prevent a slide for when they do come to rescue you. But so shut it off. Don't rush in, try to save someone. Call 911. Explain. I know it'd be hard in a situation like that, but the fire department has to find where you're at. So, it could be some very remote site or some big grain elevator with a whole bunch of bins. So clearly say where it is. If someone is totally buried, never assume they're dead. It's not common, but there have been people completely submerged in grain survive for several hours. I know there was one in Iowa. The kid was wearing a powered air purifying respirator like sandblasters wear, and it kept his mouth and his nose free, and he didn't suffocate. And they rescued him. He was totally submerged for 2 hours, and they pulled him out. And he's injured, but he was fine. Just the compression that Salah talked about got him. So never assume someone is if they're totally under, don't assume they're dead. And you call the fire departments and be there to help. I know the Dave Newcomb with the Fire Institute tells me, Illinois Fire Institute says it takes minimum 25 to 30 people for a rescue. It's a lot of backbreaking work. But yeah, so the key thing is shut everything off immediately and don't rush in and try to save them. Call 911. Those are the three basic steps.
Yeah. No, thank you, John, for that. As we're waiting for questions, I'm quickly going to go. I would like to acknowledge OSHA Harwood, that has been a vital resource to developing a lot of this training, and USDA NIFA as well. I'd like to remind our viewers there's a lot of research going on this, and we've put a lot of citations and references that you can use to go research and find some of this on your own. Do we have any questions so far? Oh, yeah. So also there's our next webinar is April 4th. So that's coming up really quickly. It's managing risks with cover crops. It's a case study of the most profitable Illinois farms using cover crops. Really pertinent topic. I'd encourage you guys all to join. Our next Cultivating Caution seminar is going to be Farm Workers Safety and Health. Very crucial. Make sure to attend, especially before our season gets in way and becomes really busy and heavy. We have a lot of different farmdoc sponsors. Thank you all for your sponsorships and making this happen. And also educational partners. Thank you as well. Thank you for joining us. This will be uploaded to YouTube as an archive, and subscribe to the channel. And lastly but not least, you could check out our website. Right now it's a bit spare, but there's information. You can contact me, contact John Lee. Let us know if there's anything you're interested in. We do a lot of training programs, especially focused on youth and other audiences. And that's it. We have 2 minutes if there's any questions. John, do you have any things that you want to highlight in these last 2 minutes?
Oh, I think I hit it pretty well. Let's see. Never entering alone, making sure things are off, evaluating your bin conditions before you go in, and check them as you unload it, because things can change. Don't get in a hurry.
So as our audience is starting to head off and filling out, I really strongly encourage you to fill out the surveys. John and I were having a debate. Should we do a whole class focused on how to rescue somebody already trapped in grain? How do you respond to that? If you think that would be helpful, indicate that in the survey. Give us a sense of what would you like to see next. That's really very helpful for us, and it allows us to tailor our programs to your needs. And we are at time, so I'm just going to thank everybody. Thank you for coming. Really appreciate having you, and I hope that you found this informative and useful. Thank you. And thank you, John.
You bet. Thank you, Salah. Enjoyed it.